Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sue Fasciani with Tiger Home and Building Inspections. I'm the marketing manager, and we are so glad you are able to join us today for our presentation on this old Connecticut house, understanding architectural styles and selling of antique homes in today's market. I do want to let you know that I am recording this presentation right now. I also want to give you a couple reminders to please keep yourself on mute. We will be handling questions through the chat, and throughout the presentation, we will take time out to answer those questions that come in. And also, for the first time, we're trying a poll. So please bear with us. I think it's going to go smoothly, but hopefully you guys will interact with us on that. Next slide, please. We're going to be doing a raffle. So if you can stay to the end, that would be great. It's a Panera gift card and giving you a second chance to win. Please follow us on Instagram. And if you already follow Tiger, you can tag us in the comment about today's seminar. So before we get started, I do want to point out I'm here with Kara Golden. She is Director of Marketing, and also Joe DeLaurentis. He is principal of Tiger Group and also has been an inspector for 26 years. Joe holds supervisory pest control license, is a member of the American Society of Home Inspectors, and has a background and specialty in construction and remodeling with extensive knowledge in the latest construction innovations. Joe also manages and trains all of our inspectors with Tiger Group. A little bit about Tiger is that we are a family-owned business. We've been around since 1992, inspecting residential homes, doing commercial assessments throughout the state of Connecticut, bordering towns in New York, Mass, and Rhode Island. And we also keep our inspectors are out there 7 days a week, and we keep our office open 7 days a week. So your clients can call in and schedule. We're available to answer any questions. All of our inspectors do hold the wood destroying insect license, so we're able to include that for free with our residential home inspections. And our environmental staff that we have, they're all certified to set up those electronic monitors for radon. They're also trained to do the water samples. And we have a mold division, so we're doing mold assessments and testing as well. And lastly, out of our 22 inspectors, many of them do hold specialties such as 203K HUD, commercial division, antique homes, etc. So if you ever have any questions, you can certainly, contact Kara or myself or the office, and we can help set you up with the right inspector. At this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Joe. He's just going to touch on our COVID procedures for a second and then get right into the topic for today.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Sue. I appreciate everybody logging in to attend today. Very quickly, just a reminder, we're keeping this in all of our presentations, even though it's been over a year. And thankfully, coming May 19th, things get relieved a little bit more for us. But CTR at this time still has the announcement that they expect only the inspector, the principal buyers, and their agents to be present at home inspections. The reason why we remind this is we want to keep sellers comfortable, right? Allowing showings, allowing home inspections, people in their homes, etc. So in addition, of course, we're still stocking everyone with the necessary personal protection equipment. Of course, wearing masks when requested, wearing gloves, and if requested by sellers, wiping down surfaces and such. There's still great variation in what we're experiencing between clients and or sellers' level of concerns, all this. So if there's a particular situation, just let us know so that we can, adjust things so our clients and or sellers are satisfied with people coming in their house. In regards to the presentation today, we're going to touch on these four bullet type areas, eras and styles, characteristics of older homes. We're going to do a little testing of your antique home IQ after we learn some of that. And then Sue will test the poll so that you can answer some of the questions, and we'll see how everybody did on those tests. We'll move into construction processes and some tips on determining age, maybe not for you, but some of the things that people or inspectors use when looking at these homes. Inspecting antique homes, why does it take longer? What are the processes that are different? And then on your end, showing antique homes. This historically has been a 3-hour continuing education class for us. We've condensed it down to an hour in the past for office presentations, and now reworked it a little bit for Zoom presentations. So moving through these slides will be important as we go. There will be question slides as well that we can read those chat questions. This timeline is going to be very important to continue to refer back to. You probably recognize a bunch of these names and eras and such on here. The takeaway from this one to start with is the larger rectangular blocks are the broader eras of these types of homes. Underneath them in the arrows are the smaller arrows and such that indicate more finite details on those. Many of those fall under the same eras. Look at Victorian, we have Greek Revival, Gothic Revival, Italianate, Second Empire, etc. underneath those. So as we talk about them, reflect back to this slide. We've had requests in the past, and if anyone is interested, go ahead and we can email this out to you. I think it's a great chart to use to keep these things in mind. So starting out with a classic, the salt box style there, of course, originated, copied after the salt box itself. Sorry, one sec. I'm in trouble with the scrolling. Defined, came from a colonial actually, and the lean-to that used to be added off the back kind of morphed into this salt box type orientation where the rear section was 1 story only. That was predominantly due to tax purposes. So that's kind of how this colonial morphed into a salt box type design. The center chimney is one definitive characteristic. Very minimalist, as were some of the earlier houses in the 1700s to 1750s, including other designs, but simple windows and of course, coming over with some of these clapboard type sidings and such with the details there. Of course, the Cape Cod, a rather simple design as well. This stemmed from more of when the Puritans came over, a really simple 1.5-story structure to build. It was kept small on purpose for the ease of heating. Of course, the central chimney was the huge benefit with that, as everything was just wood fireplace for cooking and heating the house. So early settlers had an easy house to build. When they ran into the fact that we had significant snows here, that was the reason for the steep roof. So everything would shed off of this design. Here's an example of a Georgian for you. You see the era there. This one falls into that 1720 to 1780. You will see houses, of course, with not just one date on them. They may have been added on to, they may have been moved and things like that as you move through those. Some of the characteristics of the Georgian here, notice that windows are not grouped in pairs. They're all individual windows. We have this cornice details that were starting to come in a little bit more involved than some of those simpler early eras. And then ornate designs around doorways and such with window tops and door tops and such coming in to play as things move forward there. Then we have the federal or Adams, as is referred to. The Adams part is a reference to Robert Adams, who's an English architect, the 1780 to 1830 era there. And there's a little bit simpler of an example, but does have some of the characteristics. The round top window that you can see fits in. And then, of course, the gabled front end and a porch or at least roof covering as well. Symmetrical windows again throughout, and those fan light windows. Windows are a big part of this. You've heard me use the term already, and it's an easy way to see some of the details of homes, remembering that you may have pieces of different styles. You may have had changes over the years, but looking back to the details that you see, windows are a good starting point with these. A lot of it was actually before we had glass, we just had a way to open a window, right? It was a closed, didn't let any light in type window. And then as glass evolved, first we had crown glass, which was blown glass that was then flattened out. And you've probably seen that in older homes where you still have some of that bubbled type appearance in the glass. As things continued there around 1700, we evolved into plate glass, and we allowed more window designs. Operable windows were very purposely used for ventilation. So the double hung, you'll see down below here, we expected cold air to come in the bottom, hot air to be able to be released out the top. That's why we had operable top sashes. Of course, you could operate just bottom sash as well. And then things evolve into more ornate window designs, mulling multiple groups of windows together, bows, bays, etc., different types of windows there. We have the Victorian area. Which of these residential Victorian architecture recognized by which of these on the right side? Does anybody think? We don't need to poll in here, but just think about it, read through them quickly. There's a long list. This is one of those questions on the bubble test where it's all of the above. Again, interesting when you hear a lot of these names thrown around. Try to keep it simple as you may be learning or investigating for a listing or some such. Victorian is a big, broad scope that covers all of these little individuals, and you can start to get a little bit more finite with what fits underneath that Victorian area from 1820 through 1920 there. So things changed a little bit. We were previously restricted by post and beam construction. When we get to tools and sawmills and such, we'll learn a little bit more about that. But once we were able to move away from that very basic form of construction and into balloon framing, we're able to modify structures, have jogs in structures, bays in structures, and things like that. Turrets became more commonplace because we were able to modify to irregular plans. There's a great example of a Greek revival. We found some awesome pictures throughout the state. And if you take away another thing from this presentation, which many of you probably already know, it's one of the great blessings of where we live. We have some fantastic houses still standing, still looking absolutely beautiful. And we've cited some examples here, one of a Greek revival from up in Litchfield. Some of the common Greek revival characteristics. These were most prominent 1820s to 1830s. However, they have influenced and continue to influence architecture for decades. The gable or hip was a lower pitch than we were used to with those capes and initial colonials that came into play. We did have door surrounds. This one is not extremely ornate, but you do see some glass in the door, heavier hinges. And here's an example of a more of a covered porch with columns and such as things became ornate. Still sticking with that symmetrical type window layout in this Greek revival era as well. Some closer samples of decorative doors and such as things became more to show off your house as it may be, rather than just simple shelter. Some detailed terms for you in this section here. The entire setup or detail is the entablature. And within that, we have the cornice up on the top, the frieze board, which is a term you probably still hear used in construction, and then the architrave, one that you don't hear too often in construction. Not likely you'll need to get into those deep details. If I had to take one of these away, it would be frieze. The second one would be the cornice itself. Some Gothic details. Frederick Platt House from up in New Britain. The turret is probably the most common takeaway from the Gothic, but you also have the cross gable. It's very common. You see it in the illustrated image, and also here we're actually melding this hip roof in with the gable rather than just a cross gable. Things again continue to stay very ornate. Towers were commonplace, as I said. Some terracotta, slate roofs and such play into this Gothic design as well. And things getting ornate holds very true for the Italianate, 1840s through 1880s. The most defining characteristic here will be the tower or turret up on the top, including the windows. And some other design characteristics where we have all the details, the brackets in the gables and the overhangs as well. There's an simpler example from the Waterbury area. Again, there's our true defining characteristic with that tower or cupola up on top, and again, the lower slope roof there. Also, you'll notice one thing that's fairly consistent is the round top or even ovalish top windows that follow through with this design characteristic as well. Mansard or Second Empire, truly Second Empire, but really in this design, we see the predominant roof style is mansard. So again, you probably heard the term. If you don't know its definition, it's a multiple pitch roof, so very steep here. Basically a four-sided hip roof with a very low slope, in some cases flat top on it. So up on top of these, we are normally two pitch at the most, if not flat, and then dormers end up laid out in that upper roof section there with glass as well. Taller windows, again, this falls into that Victorian era, really not so much by design, but more by the timing. These initially came out of France and then morphed into English architecture, which then made its way over to the US, of course. Queen Anne remains another with very decorative. The one that we have a photo of still has some of those decorative details. You'll see a lot of mixed colors. Of course, the bracketing and dormers as well throughout. No turret on this one, but conical turrets and others, towers as well attached to the house. This is effectively what inspired that shingle style construction of the 1800s when it started, and right up through today. A lot of these details morph into our shingle style construction that we see on a lot of our waterfront still used. Craftsman construction, one of my favorites, but we're getting into a little bit newer as it may be. We had a question come up on what does antique mean anymore? This is about as late as we're going to get into it here, is into the 1930s. This evolved out of an era where craftsmanship was, there was a lot of pride in craftsmanship and furniture building. So a lot of this furniture building morphed over into some of these details, usually darker tones on the houses, definitely bracketing underneath the roofing, overhangs, large overhangs. You may have porches and such, and not always wood, sometimes some stucco and brick or stone masonry mixed in with this craftsman era to put it all together into the details. We had the economic boom of the 20s, and this pushed towards mass production of homes, getting houses prepared, and we fall into the era where Sears created the modern home division and allowed people to purchase homes that were delivered by rail. The entire kit was put together: framing, sheathing, siding, flooring, a lot of beautiful trim work. Essentially, you purchased a package and everything was prepared and put on the boxcar. There are some details that are good fits for these. This is actually a sample of one of the packages. Most of them that I've seen around here are not as large as this home. They're usually smaller, craftsman bungalow style, with a lot of prominent columns, brackets, and such. You see this one, actually, we matched a photo we took at an inspection to one of the catalogs. It takes a heck of an effort. There were 447 different designs. As I've continued to look at these, sometimes I see maybe a copycat or something similar. I'm pretty convinced driving up that it's going to be a Sears home, and unable to accurately confirm. There were about 100,000 of these built, give or take, as the Sears historians put it, throughout the country. So we see those in varying areas. What can you do to identify these? Verify the construction date. 1908 to 1940 is the era of the Sears home, so that should help you to start to dial it in. Check the floor plan, take some of these unique trim details. The biggest indicator for me is very prominent and detailed oak trim. Now, of course, somebody could have painted it, but all of that was left wood with a varnish or polyurethane or some such on it. And that's usually the first telltale if you don't see something outside that jumps out at you. In some cases, you may locate stamps on building materials inside the building. By chance, you might find a shipping label. And then, of course, you could do municipal research to see if there's anything recorded on the property as well. If you're lucky, the homeowner has some information for you if it's the listing side, because I think it would be a benefit to those that are interested to explain these things. Modern design moves us up into the 1920s and 1940s. You're all probably familiar with some very prominent architects. Frank Lloyd Wright and Henry Green did a lot of designing with. We moved into this boxy, very geometric style of design and construction. Low slope, predominantly flat roofs. The result of these, unfortunately, was a lot of water problems. When these were first constructed, it was very difficult to waterproof flat areas and all of these intersections between the very square and geometric designs. Some other designs that came out of it, the Art Deco type design, and even some ranch type designs stem from this modernistic era of construction. And again, we're blessed in Connecticut. We have one of the most prominent modern homes, the Glass House, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, 20th century modern there in New Canaan area. Any questions on that first section?
Yep, we have one question that just came in. Give me the date range again for the Sears home kits.
The 1908 to 1940.
Okay, great.
I had one question come in to me directly, Joe. They love all the styles of the houses that you're talking about. Stephanie was just wondering, is there a book that you know about that has all the different styles of antique homes?
Yes, I don't have the title offhand, but we do have a hardcover book in the office. I can get her some information.
Yeah, if you send that to me, I can get it to her. Great.
Yes, and when we get towards the end with working on listing or showing, properties like this, that's a great reference. And I'll say it once, maybe 3 times. Reading your client is the key on these. Who are you talking to? I've seen circumstances where someone is loaded full of information and they quickly start unloading it on someone who's kind of like, well, I really just liked how the house was on the water. So gauge who you're talking to, because you will find those that are extremely interested and they want to own a house from a certain era, or they're curious about the designs, and they really light up when you tell them some of the reasons for the features of the homes.
So one last thing, we did get a request from someone else for the book. So Sue is going to include the title of the book in our follow-up email. So it will go to everybody.
Great. All right, Sue, we're ready to poll.
You guys should see the poll up there now. Yep. Oh, I think, yeah, people are answering it. We got a couple more seconds for this.
You can actually see the dashboard. I love it.
Yeah.
They're doing a great job.
Yep. We'll do 5 more seconds. All right. And share the results. There we go. 76% said Queen Anne. Joe, is that right?
That is right. Yep. So the Queen Anne, that one is from, how do you shut it or do I shut it?
You show it.
Turn it off?
Oh, I shut it off, the poll.
Okay. So this Queen Anne's from up in Waterbury. The patterns are important here. Notice the patterns of the shingles and the slate roof there, the mixed colors. We have the porch, which is very common for that Queen Anne style, and the tower. That's probably the key takeaway, the tower and the bays design as well there.
All right, and here's the second poll. I don't know if you guys can move the poll once it's launched on your screen over, so it's
Yes,
not
you can.
covering
You
the
can.
house.
If you hold your mouse on it, you can drag it around to see the pictures.
All right, we got a couple votes going in. All right, we'll do 5 more seconds. Get your votes in. All right, I'm gonna end the poll and share the results. What do we have here? Joe, do those look right?
Sorry, I got to close it.
Okay.
You got it. Greek Revival on the left. That's a property in East Haddam from the 1854. And then the Italian 8 from up in the Mystic area, just a little bit newer, or older, excuse me, 1850s. The takeaways, the easy things to recognize, that lower slope gable, that pedimented roof, classic Greek Revival architecture there, usually a gable window up in that pedimented architecture. The door surround, remember, rather ornate on the door surround as well. And then moving over to the Italian 8 from the Mystic area, there's our low slope roof, our coins on the corner, Quoins, very common decorative term for some of these architectures as well. And then our tower up on the roof.
All right, name these styles here. Pull up the poll. Here it comes. All right, you can see that we should be able to see the poll up. Yes. All right, we'll do 10 more seconds on the poll. Oh, this is interesting. All right, and I'll end the poll, share the results. And go ahead, Joe, you can share the answers.
Sure. This one was intended to be a little bit of a challenge. I saw a lot of people going for federal over here. It does carry some of those same Greek Revival characteristics, and the federal really wouldn't have that upper window installed as well. So a little bit of a different design. This one is a Greek Revival capish more than full second story. See that story and a half again, but does carry some of those Greek Revival details with that porch entry as well. And of course, both of them have the ornate surrounding on the front doors. So just, these are in here actually to remind you that it's not always easy to quickly pinpoint. You may not want to completely characterize it in some cases, but rather speak towards some of the specific details that come from certain eras as well.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't ready. This is name that style. Here we go. Yep.
This one should be easy. We should get it.
Yep. Everybody's answering. They're coming in now.
It's great.
Yep. 10 more seconds. Actually, all right, I'm going to end it now. Oops, somebody chatted over my ending. Let's see. Okay, share results. And now,
of course, the easy giveaway, right? The mansard style roof puts it into that mansardic or second empire as it may be. The dormer coming out of that lower slope of that mansard roof. There's our brackets all the way around underneath that roof overhang, and of course our porch as well. But remember those dormers and the mansard slab type of roof, excuse me. That's the Samuel Forbes house from up in East Hartford.
all right, this is our last one.
Everybody
Whose
should get
house
this.
was this?
Boom, right to 100%.
Well, there's only 7. Yeah, yep, everybody. Uh, All right, I'm gonna end the poll in just a minute. All right, here we go. Well, we share the results. Everybody says Mark Twain house. Is that right?
You got it. Of course it is. Funny fact there, $40,000 to build that structure in 1874. Very, very ornate, right? Just the amount of detail there is fantastic, but the Gothic revival details there are absolutely the tower, the very steep roof, the very ornate chimneys and other details throughout with the woodworking as well. Another question break there as well.
Oh, I think we're all set for now.
All right.
I just have one comment on the questions here.
Yes.
Isabella commented, one category that we've not included are antique farmhouses. And these also come on the market occasionally here. And that is a great bit of information and something we can include and may even be included in our 3-hour CE class that we teach. There are some categories that aren't in this 1-hour session, but as we all know, the modern farmhouse is a takeoff on the antique farmhouse, and it's very, very popular today.
Great. So a couple times I've mentioned using these terms for your listings and or your showings when you're working with buyers. You know, I don't expect, unless you're really, really specifically going to target this market, you to have these terms on the tip of your tongue, but knowing the general historic style is very important. Use that timeline slide that I mentioned. Start with speaking on the broader terms and then get more defined if you're able to glean that information based on the property. Do some research on the building. And the second time I'll say it, I find it extremely important when dealing with these properties to read the client. How interested are they in this stuff? What part of it is really, you know, interesting to them? Do they like the history? Is it just they like the design? How sensitive are people to old windows is always a big one. We get a lot of questions about the energy efficiency of the windows. Some will immediately say, I would never absolutely change them. I need to keep them historical. And others are ready to rip the windows out immediately if, again, depending on location of the house. But reading the client is important after doing your research and giving them information as they need it. Nothing else on the chat, right? I said the question slide too early.
I just want to point
Just
out,
construct-
we're going to be sending this recording out. We're getting a lot of people are interested in this, Joe. So they're asking for slides. So we will send
Okay.
out the recording.
Great. And the 3-hour CE is always a good option too. I feel bad. I have, things in my head that I usually include in the 3-hour that we can't get too far into with keeping time in mind. So moving on to understanding the construction process, and it's important to back up and look at some of this stuff to see how these houses evolved. We started talking about capes during, the early Puritan times, and thinking about what tools they had. Also regionally, even in our small state, you'll see great differences as you get closer to waterfront areas, particularly ports where a lot of shipbuilding took place, right? You'll see very ornate details on some properties because the shipbuilders were building houses in the winter time. So you had all that, that talent moving over to construction. So we'll touch on tools. We'll talk a little bit about foundations and framing, things on the exterior to keep the elements out, shingles and siding, remembering that the initial impetus for these were truly just to keep the elements out. And then we slowly morphed into making these things more decorative. In today's world, I think we choose these exterior siding and roofing materials as much for decoration as for true function. Plaid and laster interiors, flooring sections, windows, and then moving into when mechanicals came into play, wiring, plumbing, and the chimneys that remain are always a big question as well. You saw some very particular tools in use. The draw knife was used to skin the bark off of logs. That's in the top left there. Some turning tools for lathes where you could get a little bit more ornate. This is some furniture work here as well. Blacksmiths impacted the ability for nails use. So taking it back to the original post and beams, right, where everything was mortise and tenon type joinery and many other joints, pegged together with wood, was because we didn't have the ability to make nails. When every nail was made by hand, you use them very sparingly, unlike today's world where we're blasting them in with pneumatic nail guns all the time. And then, of course, bottom left, some of the finishing tools, some old wooden clamps and block planes and such there as well. So the early days of making shingles and or pegs, we use this froe up here to literally split pieces off of a log as it may be to make each individual shingle. So when people talk about shakes, that's really the original roofing shake was a much thicker tapered and or split because of how you had to make it with the hand tools. And then we had the broad axe, which was used for shaping round logs into square logs, and then they were finished with the adze. Here's the broad axe in use. You basically go right down the whole side of it to square that off. Now, this helps people to understand why we still have round logs in some of the very old houses, why we still have bark on some of those. Once you squared one side of it, you could simply use that for the side that you put the flooring on and leave the rounds on round edges on the rest of it. And you can start to see why before we had sawmills, some of that stuff was left in place. As sawmills came into play, these can be very helpful clues into dating structures. So of course we have the abilities to cross cut by hand here with two guys, but the original vertical sawmills, which made timbers into planks, were actually by hand as well, with a fellow on top and one below pulling that same saw up and down. When water came into play, the same action was used effectively. We used water to drive that same vertical saw. So by seeing that, we might know the era of a vertical sawmill use, and this timber here was sawn that way. Notice the different striations on here from a circular sawmill. Circular sawmills came into play when we had steam to start assisting the performance of sawmills. Started about 1830, but really became more prominent about 1900. And I went backwards on you, but down below is hand hewn here. That's one that was squared. And these are the adze marks that we talked about in that prior slide. This tool was run down that whole edge in order to square that off into a timber before we had sawmills. So again, these are important to understand. Things were kept very simple because making these timbers by hand was extremely arduous. And as we started to be able to make more and more lumber in different ways, you can see how the structures change, the ability to have trim details, different types of sizes of wood change things as well. Briefly on the tools, this is as things advanced with making mortise and tenon joints, you would first drill it out here with that tenon drill, and then, chisel that out square in order to accept the tenon with a good set of chisels. And here we have the shaving horse, which effectively someone would sit at and make pegs all day long. So that same draw knife, you take a squared off little piece and round it into a peg so that our mortise and tenon joint here could be pegged. Those pegs were tapered in order to tighten up the joints when they are driven into it. It would literally pull the joints together for our timber frame. So again, the majority of the house was constructed, at least the frame for sure, without any need for nails until you started getting into applying siding and such. So on the home inspection side, yes, things take longer. We get a lot of questions that add to time. Is it supposed to look like that? Why is the floor bowed there? Is that okay just because it's old? Things that are different are predominantly starting with foundations and substructures below the building. It may be a very low basement. It may be a shallow crawl space, may have been a soil or sand floor for well over 100 years in a shallow crawl there. Framing, and most importantly, alterations and modifications to these older homes. We get a work order for a 1,700 structure, and you see that it's 4,000 square feet. You know for sure that you're getting into something that was added to many, many times over its entire life. The 1,700 portion is probably less than 1,000 feet of the actual house. So those things take time to kind of unwind in your head and look at the whole house and its history as well as you're going through that inspection, excuse me. We find oddities like this, right? One of the most challenging things in some of these older homes with center chimneys is that chimney cradle, usually loose laid stone, a lot of timber included in as well. I know this image is not fantastic, but you see some of the older timbers laid in with the stone. They've come back with steel and lolly columns in order to try to support the wood frame structure around it. And then of course there's an introduction of moisture and water entry with a lot of these older homes as well, stone foundations. This example here, they've driven a wedge in to the floor to try to stop the squeaking subfloor up above, but missed the mark here. This floor joist split because this is a tenon joist. In other words, there was a mortise cut into this sill and half of the joist had a tenon on it. Over the years from the increased weight, it split. So it does need some resupporting. It's not catastrophic in any way and not uncommon to see in this type of design. This is a little bit of a mix with an old timber sill and the adaptation to sawn floor joists, still keeping some of that historical joinery in place as well as we move from full post and beam to stick framing. I mentioned the chimneys. The larger old center chimneys are challenging as they may be due to adaptations. We'll see an image later of a heating system adapted to the older common flue. But we often see corbelled chimneys. So we come up the center of the house and then we try to get back to the ridge line. It was difficult to flash or waterproof these chimneys when we put them on the slope. In other words, people were a little bit smarter back then and worked not as hard to keep things dry. So that's why we see the corbelling. The disadvantage to this as these chimneys got older is when we had moisture coming in, when we started to put flue gases in there, such as coal and oil and gas, deterioration of the mortar joints started to occur when mixing with the moisture. And that's usually where we see it, is at these corbelled joints. We'll see another image of that afterwards. Is this a good repair? Yes, this was a designed repair. You see bolted connections, large timber rafters, big spacing between them, over an inch wide sawn sheathing boards, but they came back with adding some collar ties due to very common where we see some sag across the rafter line, maybe a little bit of sag in the ridge line of the house. Nothing that needs to be put back in place. It literally could not be straightened out in most cases, just re-supporting as it is there. Let's see, and the next one. So as things evolved, I mentioned mechanicals to you. As the cities started to evolve, we brought central heating in, cisterns were put in place for collecting water, and indoor plumbing came into play. We saw a lot of adaptations to the buildings that drove some of the changes in designs and things. Heating, probably the most prominent. We went from structures that were heated by wood. That fireplace was used for heating and for cooking, and it was kept running literally all the time. Then all of a sudden we had a central heating system we wanted to plug into it. This was a closet that was borrowed, as it may be, to add a flue pipe to come up out of the oil furnace into the chimney at a different location and up and out of the house. Adding wiring, we started with older knob and tube wiring. Is it safe? Theoretically, knob and tube wiring is very safe. The two wires that form the set are the same as what we would have in BX or Romex cable. And unless you grabbed both of them and got to the bare wires, it was difficult to get shocked, as it may be. All of this was run open air. We didn't have insulation. So because it was open air, it was safe as well. Problems occurred as the casing of the wire started to deteriorate with age, but most importantly, when we started to pile insulation on top of it. And from that, losses occurred, became common in the insurance industry. So that's where knob and tube got its name, or bad name, I should say, is through insurance losses. And that's where we see most of our clients running into troubles with it. Yes, it should be updated when found in older homes. And here you have some of the signs. I mentioned some of the things we see at inspections, right? The majority of the house is older framing. This was actually a one-story. It's hard to see here, but the second story was added onto it. Some of the telltales from the outside were different windows, but also this triangle gable end vent that was in place, some of the trim work. And once we got around inside, you can see they had adapted some plywood sheathing and changed the structure there as well. So some of the little tells that you'll see after you start going through these properties. Deterioration issues, what are the top three and how do we look at these things? Well, obviously you talk about house truth. This one here is on its way out, unfortunately, but the house truth part of it is really the first thing we do. I still do on any property, but with an older home in particular, is a walk around far away from the house to get a look at movement in walls, sag in the ridge line. Is there a chimney? Was there a chimney? These kinds of things to get a feel for the truth of the house and the settlement. How does it sit on the lot? Does it seem like it always was a hillside sloping lot or a flat lot, as it may be? Then water penetration and moisture, probably the keys, and chimneys I mentioned earlier are a huge factor in deterioration on some of these older houses. There's a good shot from far away of some sag in a ridge line. Not always a problem needing repair, but certainly worth a further look when you get up to the attic space. Maybe when you get to siting the walls, see if there's something that's been pushed out where that sag has occurred there as well. Added support is always something to take a better look at. The one on the left is supplemental support, not installed very well. There was nothing below this, so we've created a point load as it may be. We're taking roof weight and transferring it to the second floor ceiling without anything below it. And part of this relates to modifications in this structure here. Wasn't built entirely well to start with and then was modified further. This one, on the other hand, gives a full purlin all the way across. Then they put some struts going down, and that does bear directly over a wall below it. So, and then that carried right down through the house as well. So added some good overall support. Again, still had some sag in the roof line from the outside, but it was supported in place rather than trying to push things back where they were. Water penetration and moisture. The stone foundations by nature will seep if water is put next to them on the outside. Again, people worked smarter back in the era of some of these older homes. They sited the houses appropriately. They had a lot more choices for land, of course, but allowing water to naturally run away. There were no gutters. There were larger overhangs and good grading. Over time, as we continued to landscape and change things, maybe roads and sidewalks came in, we see a lot of grading height that was brought up higher or pitched back towards the house, and we have ongoing water problems. So if the water is going to be put against the building, it's going to find a way in. Draping plastic through the whole basement may in fact keep that humidity down, but if the outside issues are not addressed, you're just going to have water sitting underneath these areas here as well. Chimneys run the gamut. This one here is early 1900s, probably up into 1920 or so, right when we started to see flue liners, predominantly clay flue liners, come into play. Asphalt sealer is not an appropriate masonry repair. We see that often just dumped all over the tops and sides of chimneys, but interior liner issues are a very common issue. Old fireplaces can still work fine without liners. People just need to acknowledge how they're going to use them, and they can be relined. Fireplaces drastically more expensive than heating appliance flues, where it's a pretty simple adaptation of a stainless steel flue liner. Here's some of that heavier deterioration I mentioned to you. When this chimney was installed, it had a parge coat or stucco applied all the way around it. Due to long-term use with gas and oil appliances, it literally wore right through into the attic space. This is an unlined brick chimney there, and that deterioration occurred from the inside of the chimney out. Here you have that adaptation of a stainless steel flue liner. This is a multiple fireplace center chimney, and you see they adapted some flue liners to the upper section of it. So one thing to be aware of, just because you see those clay flue tiles sticking out the top of the chimney, remember that they could have been rebuilt from the attic up or the roof line up, and the flue liners were put in, but they don't make it all the way down. Here you can see they added that stainless steel flue liner up the center of it. So Sue doesn't have a poll, but I'll let all you look at this one quickly and see what you can see out of this creative mason. It's an old stone support there, and they made themselves a dog bust, as it may be, or head out of the column there to design it. So some of the fun things that we find in these old basements. It's not all dirt and cobwebs. Sometimes it can be very interesting. So again, back to the adaptation of these mechanicals. What happened? You know, things were cut and moved and all this to adapt to plumbing. We had a cast iron drain put in this bathroom, and they just went ahead and cut the floor joist right out. There was some sag evident in the bathroom. Again, nothing that couldn't be repaired, but that's the cause of it, was adapting to things. These we see over older heating systems, sometimes still sitting in place. This is a fire extinguisher that when heat hits it, it would release a chemical carbon tetrachloride. The concern with these, or the potential concern I should say, is if it ever goes off now, this is considered, it's a known carcinogen now. So those should be removed and gotten rid of appropriately when they're still sitting in someone's basement. Showing these old homes, know the styles and the features as we've referenced. So do some homework to help yourself out with those. I think this is probably the best takeaway for you. Never end up in the basement. I have seen this at home inspections where the clients never looked at the basement at the showing. They love every little bit about the place, and then they get down there, and they're scared of the dungeon, as it may be, the lower basement that's very damp, has all this wood with looks horrific, but the powder post beetle damage is not really that bad. Why is there bark still on the wood, etc.? So show them that area, but remember to come back to some of the more prominent positive portions of the building as well. Starting at the front facade is always a good idea. That's where you'll pick up on some of these little details that you can show them and introduce and start that process of reading or gauging how interested they are in older structures. And as people's interest continue, remember setting some of their expectations for buildings like this. Some of them have been fantastically adapted. You know, we see some beautiful newer kitchens and bathrooms set in, but if that isn't the case yet, you may need to set some expectations on living in a house like this. Some people are very proud to become the new steward of an older home like this and make it their chance to take care of it, maintain it, and maybe upgrade it during its lifetime. So showing off those unique characteristics can be very helpful. Take advantage of your local historical society. A lot of the images that we had of the tools come from a fantastic prior employee of ours who was very active with the Clinton Historical Society, and that tool shed still it remains, along with active presentations on how all that stuff works. So I'll leave you with some tips on selecting home inspectors. We always remind everyone that in Connecticut, there is no requirement for insurance for home inspectors. So make sure that the people that your clients are working with carry errors and omissions insurance. Make sure if you have listings that those parties coming on the property have liability or workers' compensation insurance that goes beyond home inspectors, you know, whoever it may be, septic, roofer, etc. Licensing, there is a permit process, so we have to get an intern permit and do 100 inspections under a supervisor in order to get our full license and finish the testing. It's important to understand that people can operate for many years as an individual business without ever having their full license for a home inspection. We find customer service to be very important, answering the phone, particularly in this current market. Our office has extremely long hours, 8 to 8 every day, 8 to 6 on Saturday, and 5 hours on Sundays now, in order to take care of you, your clients, for scheduling and information as well. Reputation, credentials, and experience, of course, are important. And earlier on, Sue mentioned the variations and qualifications of our staff. If you have a particular need, please get in touch with us. We can certainly assign the appropriate inspector to take care of anything from one of these older homes to first-time home buyers to waterfront properties, etc.
I do have a couple questions. If everybody can just hang on for 2 more minutes, and then we'll do our raffle. Scott did share, and I think this is a great example. He lives in a farmhouse. It's 100 years old and has a stone foundation. And the previous owners many years ago installed French drains on all the gutter downspouts. And through all the hurricanes and nor'easters, he's never had a drip of water in his basement in 20 years. So it's a great example of modification to an older home so that we can live comfortably today.
Great, thank you, Scott.
One question was, would old windows affect someone getting a mortgage?
I would never say never with some of the appraiser comments I've been hearing lately, but I would say no. I don't think anyone's going to critique an older window installation, you know, at all.
Okay. And then in the old days, did they dig the foundations and fill it with rock instead of cement?
They didn't fill it with rock. They would, yes, dig the foundation and stack the rock. So loose laid would have literally been set in place, not unlike a stone wall, to create that foundation. So we didn't fill the whole hole, obviously, but you set the stones back in place. Yes.
Great. And I have lots of thank yous. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Our contact information is here on the slide. You can reach out to Sue, Joe, or myself anytime with any questions you may have on antique homes or any other type of property. And you're going to get a great follow-up email from Sue with lots of great information on it. And Sue, who are our raffle winners today?
Yep, we have for our Instagram winner, it was Suzanne Walsh. And for the other Panera gift card for attending today's seminar, it is Scott Benton. So we will follow up.
Hey,
Yay.
my best thing happened to me today.
Congratulations.
Thank
We'll
you.
follow up via email on how we can get those to both of you.
It's awesome.
Thank you all for attending, and I will leave you with, if you run into something that you see out in the field, take a picture of it, send it along to Sue, Kara, or myself. Happy to help you along with it. This is how we've developed business relationships over the years. So look us up when you need something, and we're here for you when you have home inspections.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys.
you.
Really
Thank you.
You're
informative.
welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Sue.
Bye, Tom.
Bye-bye.